All right, Hogan, before we get to the North Korea summit, President Trump doing what he does best, causing a bit of disruption tonight with this tweet. It was sent after he left the G7 summit about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The president saying, quote, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada acted so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, only to give a news conference after I left saying that U.S. tariffs were kind of insulting and that he will not be pushed around. Very dishonest and weak. Our tariffs are in response to his 270% on dairy. Trudeau then responded saying Canada won't be pushed around. Hogan, what's going on here?
Obviously, I'm in Washington, D.C. tonight, Judge. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm not at the G7. I wasn't in the meeting. But what I do know about this president is he's the same behind closed doors as he is out in front of the cameras talking to the American people. And what he did in those meetings, I've talked to Larry Kudlow already this evening. He gave me a brief coming out of the summit. And he said, listen, the president was on fire in those meetings. He was tough. He was honest. He told the world community we were not going to be the world's piggy bank anymore. We weren't going to be taken advantage of anymore. And it was time to open up trade. It was time to be free. It was time to be fair. That's what the president was behind the scenes. And now you see when he comes out, he says the same thing in public. This is where this president is because he wants to defend the American worker. They've been taking it in the teeth for decades. Right. We're in this position now because of bureaucrats and beltway politicians who have allowed us to get here, and he's going to fix it.
You know, Hogan, it reminds me of the NATO issue when, you know, right to their faces, he said, you guys aren't paying their fair share. And then, you know, it's that kind of tough love, you might call it, that gets them to pay up a bit.
Well, as John mentioned earlier in the show, President Trump arrived here in Singapore after leaving the G7 economic summit in Canada. And to say that he shook things up there would be, well, an understatement. Not long after the president departed, his top trade advisor accused Canada of stabbing the U.S. in the back. Here's correspondent Ellison Barber.
On July 1st, Canada says it will impose roughly $12.8 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Taxes on goods in two lists, variations of products made from steel, iron, aluminum, items many Americans have at home, yogurt, chocolate, maple syrup, coffee, whiskeys, playing cards, toilet paper, ballpoint pens.
I don't want to hurt American workers. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. But my job is to stand up for Canadian workers.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he does not want to impose the tariffs, but claims he has no choice.
But the administration's choice to impose illegal and unacceptable tariffs, illegitimate and unacceptable tariffs to Canadian steel workers and auto workers and on the Canadian economy must be met with an equivalent response.
That news conference enraged the president and his administration. They say Canada has wronged the U.S. on trade for years, that the U.S.'s steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and the European Union are a national security necessity. President Trump says the U.S. is now looking at adding more tariffs, this time on automobile imports.
There's a special place in hell for any foreign leader that engages in bad faith diplomacy with President Donald J. Trump and then tries to stab him in the back on the way out the door. Now, and I'll tell you this, to my friends in Canada, that was one of the worst political miscalculations of a Canadian leader in modern Canadian history.
One Republican congressman says the president isn't wrong when it comes to some of his complaints on trade, but he's concerned about a trade war.
In my district, I hear from farmers, I hear from heavy equipment manufacturers. All of them have concerns about tariffs, specifically with Canada. He needs to be strong in getting a better deal, but making sure, too, that we don't get into a full-fledged trade war. Tariffs could possibly lead us there.
There are also questions about what this could mean for NAFTA talks. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross previously said the talks were separate from tariffs, but on Saturday, Canada's finance minister reportedly said they cannot work on NAFTA negotiations under the, quote, threat of tariffs.
Wow, stabbing in the back, Mercedes?
Well, I had spent a lot of time talking to Larry Kudlow this weekend, where the Trump administration, they were sitting down with these G7 participants. They had reached consensus on so much of what the communique had included, including reforms to the WTO, for example. And the mere fact that President Trump gets on the plane on his way to Singapore, and then you had Prime Minister Trudeau double-cross us and basically start attacking the United States. At that point, the president, it was incredibly disappointing. The president then decided to not support the statement of communique. It was, I think it was a moment of disappointment for the administration because of the mere fact that, as we know, Canada, in so many of its cases, has pushed forward unfair trade practices that basically impact particularly so many of our farmers here in the United States, our lumber market, and it really is something that's incredibly disappointing for us to see what Trudeau has done.
I understand that in terms of the double crossing and going back on something that was initially agreed upon. But Mercedes, Canada is the biggest single buyer of American goods and services in the world. So, well, I mean, everybody we speak with says the same thing. We have a surplus with Canada. Why pick a fight with Canada? I can understand the others.
Well, I want to say that Canada picked a fight with us.
Okay.
I mean, it was clearly Prime Minister Trudeau who, moments after President Trump left, decided to attack the United States. Here's the deal. What President Trump wants to do is to provide a fair, level playing field for our those of us in our market so that they're able to export goods. What we have seen time and time again is when you look at the lumber market, for example, Canada dumps lumber into the United States. They manipulate dairy prices that impact areas like Wisconsin. And so the president wants to have this discussion in terms of ensuring that we have some reform in our trade system and wants to be working with our allies to do that. And so tariffs are one of those instruments that will be used. And so in essence, I think for Prime Minister Trudeau to, after having a successful meeting, to go afterwards and double cross us, I think that's why, you know, we know that President Trump took his action.
But what about the surplus? I mean, yes, you're talking about lumber, you're talking about dairy and the outsized tariffs, but at the end of the day, the U.S. still has a surplus with Canada.
Well, there's clearly fixes that need to be made to the trading system. This goes beyond Canada. This goes into the European Union as well, that you know, for example, that their tariffs on cars coming into the United States are at 10%.
Yeah, no,
but
that I
at
get.
The end of the day, this is a overview broad of how we need to be fixing the trading system. With Canada, with the European Union, there are fixes that need to be made with Canada to ensure that our farmers are not impacted by what Canada is doing.
So what happens now then, Mercedes? I mean, does this war of words threaten to poison the relations altogether between Canada and the U.S.? That's what people are worried about.
Look, I think, as you know, President Trump for very long has been a coalition builder. You look at the case, for example, that he's worked with our allies to help ensure that we have a successful summit in Singapore when it comes to dealing with North Korea. President Trump has been a leader on pushing forward these changes in North Korea, has worked with Macron, has worked with Merkel. When it comes to trade, we want to see significant changes. Yeah. We want to see significant reforms, and that's going to take tough talk with our allies.
All right, let me switch gears, ask you about the Department of Justice. The Inspector General is expected to release its report on the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. We will get that report this Thursday. Senate Judiciary Committee member Senator Lindsey Graham previewed some of the questions he has for the IG with me this weekend on Sunday Morning Futures. Listen to this.
Do you believe the way the FBI handled the Clinton email investigation, it was on the up and up? Do you believe it was fair? Do you believe they were in the tank for Clinton and hated Trump? Was it really a serious investigation, or was it a politically compromised? As to the FISA warrant, do you believe it was appropriate for the Democratic Party to hire a foreign agent to go to Russia to get dirt on candidate Trump, and the FBI and the DOJ use that dossier that's never been verified to get a warrant against an American citizen? I want to hear him say, one way or the other, whether or not the Clinton email investigation was professionally done, on the up and up, and what he thinks about the FISA warrant.
Lindsey Graham's committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, will hold the testimony where Michael Horowitz will testify following that IG report. What are you expecting from the IG report, Mercedes? Does the White House believe laws were broken?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the release of this report, but as we know, President Trump has expressed concern of the higher ranks of the FBI being politically, used, they making decisions based on political purposes. And so there has been concern about that. We'll see what the IG report comes out with.
All right, we will leave it there. Mercedes, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Great to see you.
Mercedes Schlapp at the White House this morning.
Thank you. God bless you. and God bless America.